afternoon everyone, I'm COLONELDAMNEDERS and we're back with some more breaking Warhammer 3 news. Today we have the Tzeentch roster, so let's waste no more time and get right into it. However, before we get into the actual roster, there are a few army mechanics worth mentioning first. All Tzeentch units have access to the barrier. This is a shield that protects the units from damage and it regenerates quickly whilst outside of combat. This is basically acting as a secondary health bar. This makes hit and run into a great strategy for the roster, as you can dive in, do some damage, then dip out, and wait for your shields to come back before going back in for more. The barrier can also be buffed and changed through technology and skills, and it's only going to get stronger. Tzeentch armies also utilise the Gods of Magic mechanic. These are special army abilities that are charged via using the Winds of Magic in battle via spellcasting. They are powerful effects that can wipe enemies from the battlefield with ease, and of course the more caster lords and heroes you have in battle, the faster these will become available. First up, we have our legendary lord, Kairos Fateweaver, leader of the Oracles of Tzeentch. The main power of Kairos is their near unparalleled magical ability and knowledge. He'll be mainly contributing to the battle, using a wide array of magic from the lore of Tzeentch, as well as parts of the 8 main laws of magic, though he can only bring one of the 8 parts with him in each battle. The lore of Tzeentch spell names have also been revealed: the Blue Fire of Tzeentch, Pink Fire of Tzeentch, Treason of Tzeentch, Glean Magic, Tzeentch's Firestorm, and Infernal Gateway. The lore is apparently based on all-out offense, with 4 spells dealing direct damage and the other 2 focused on debuffing. Now Kairos is also a powerful melee combatant, meaning he will be right into the thick of fighting just as much as he is soaring overhead, bringing magical support. Kairos also has access to a couple of unique abilities. The Staff of Tomorrow allows him to reduce all of his spell cooldowns in an instant, and the Gaze of Fate allows him to paralyze units, prevent movement, and plummet their melee attack stats. Now for the first of our non-legendary lords, the Exalted Lord of Change. They are fairly similar to a weaker Kairos. They are great melee combatants, as well as powerful spellcasters, with the choice of the laws of Tzeentch and metal. Aside from that, there's not really much to them. They just want to get into the thick of battle and slaughter with magic and melee as much as possible. Our other lords are the Heralds of Siege. These are basically regular pink horrors, but given a little more sentience and magical prowess, allowing them to function as a lord and utilise the laws of metal and Tzeentch. They can also use 2 mounts, the Disc of Tzeentch or a Burning Chariot. Both of these will drastically change their stats, but for now we don't really get much more info than that. What we do know is that these 2 mounts will allow them to fly, meaning they can now be around the battlefield much easier and much quicker than normal. The first of our heroes are the Cultists of Tzeentch. From what it says in the post, it seems like these cultists may be responsible for setting up some of the cult buildings for Tzeentch, so we can assume they spread public order and corruption at the very least. They're also quite unique in the roster, as they can utilise the Law of Fire, meaning you can have access to yet another Law of Magic, and an extremely powerful one at that. They can also mount Chaos Steeds to get them around in battle much quicker, but in any form, they aren't going to be great melee combatants, so keep them safe to provide support at all costs. Finally, they can also summon demons directly from the Chaos Realms, including Lords of Change themselves, so you'll want to keep them alive long enough for them to do that at the very least. Our other heroes are the Iridescent Horrors. These are somewhere between Pink Horrors and Heralds. They are masters of the magical arts, as well as being powerful in combat, some even to the point of taking down other champions of chaos. They have access to the same laws and mounts of the Heralds of Tzeentch, of Metal and Tzeentch, and the Discs and the Burning Chariot. They can also enhance their magic via the Magical Locust that allows them to greatly buff allies or summon more demons from the Chaos Realms. Now we get to the actual meat of the roster, the actual units, starting with melee infantry and starting with the Blue Horrors of Tzeentch. These are beings of pure magic, and while melee troops can launch an initial volley of magical fire that gives them the initial advantage versus basically anyone, similar to miners with blasting charges. As with all demon units, when they run out of leadership, they start to wither and become unstable rather than fleeing from battle. Despite their small size, they can put up a considerable fight against units much larger than them, and strike fear into the heart of anyone unfortunate enough to face them. Next we have the Forsaken of Tzeentch, and would you believe they are the last melee infantry unit we have. You already know the Forsaken from Khorne and the Warriors of Chaos. They received the Blessings of Chaos, and it wasn't all they imagined, so now they're set to roam as abominations until the sweet release of death, though that probably wouldn't be much better knowing Chaos. They are a straightforward front lines unit with high armour for the Tzeentch faction, and as such, you're going to be getting plenty of use out of them. Onto the ranged units now, starting with the Pink Horrors. These are more or less the pink version of the Blue Horrors, but they are much more specialised in ranged warfare. They vomit burning hellfire that deals fire-based damage, meaning they are exceptionally effective versus less armoured units, but tend to drop off later into the game. They are also excellent melee combatants, so work well as a hybrid unit to be used on the front lines as well as the back. They also have another variant, Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. These gain a massive boost in ranged damage and every other area over regular Pink Horrors. They also increase the Winds of Magic recharge rate per unit on the field. Kicking off the cav units, we have the Chaos Knights of Tzeentch. These are very similar to the other Chaos Knights we've seen so far. They offer a more sustained combat-based use case, rather than the raw charging power of some of the other cav. They are heavily armoured with massive leadership and cause fear among all they face. When you add the barrier to their health and armour, they are nigh impossible to take down. The Doom Knights of Tzeentch are next up. These are the disc riding cav we've seen in the trailers, and they are some of the most powerful mortals in the world. They are a flying shock cav which can take out nearly anything in a single charge. Now they aren't as armoured as land-based units, but they are much faster and hit a hell of a lot harder to more than make up for this, and they are by far the strongest melee-focused unit in the roster. Our final cav unit is the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch. These are discs of Tzeentch being pulled by Screamers and ridden by Exalted Flamers. They offer massive ranged firepower from the Flamers, and the blog claims this is the strongest ranged firepower anywhere in the world, even more so than artillery. Unfortunately, this also means they have very limited ammo and must engage in melee once they run out, which doesn't seem to be too much of a problem. They boast extreme speed, powerful area attacks, and the ability to escape harm with ease. Finally, we come to the largest section by far, the monsters and beasts, starting with the Chaos Furies of Tzeentch. We've seen them before with Khorne, so naturally Tzeentch has its own variation. The only difference between the two is they lose the Frenzy of Khorne in exchange for the Barrier of Tzeentch. This makes them a little tougher and much more effective at hit and runs. They are also a great early game alternative to those late game flyers. The Screams are next, and these are the Manta Ray-like units we've seen flying overhead of Tzeentch's battles. They're unarmoured and don't bring too much health, but still do decent work once they're in combat, and function as an early game cav alternative. They want to be moved in and out of combat to make the most of their charge, as well as the barrier ability. Hopefully this doesn't mean we'll only see them in the early game, as they are far too cool looking to be forgotten about once you reach later turns. The Spawn of Tzeentch are again another unit we're all relatively familiar with, due to their use in Warhammer 2 and the Khorne roster. There's really not much change to how they are now. They don't have much armor and are a low model count, but they hit really hard, so get them embedded and leave them to get to work. Next we have the Lords of Change. These are powerful spellcasting monster units and are pretty much weaker versions of the Exalted Lords of Change in the Lords section. They have full access to their magic, though we aren't told what lore that is. They still do great work on the front lines, and they can also fly, meaning they can be anywhere, doing anything, whenever you need them. They can also enhance their magical abilities through various campaign techs. The Flamers we heard about yesterday are next, and they are pretty badass. They are high damage ranged monsters that deal tons of area damage with their flaming ranged attacks. This does mean you'll need to pick their angle and distance of attacks to avoid friendly fire, and to get them firing at all. They're also decent melee combatants if they have to be, so should they run out of ammo, they'll be more than happy to continue battling in close quarters. They also have another variation, the Exalted Flamers of Tzeentch. These have a much more powerful ranged attack, and are one of the hardest hitting units in the game if they can get a shot off. Both units also apply a Warp Fire debuff, which increases damage taken from fire attacks, which apparently strengthens most of Tzeentch's army, which leads me to wonder what other units might have fire damage that we haven't been told so far. Exalted Flamers are also single entities from what I understand, so have much more limited ammo, so you need to choose where you're going to send these shots of devastating damage. And of course, when they burn through their ammo, pun intended, you don't have to be afraid to send them into melee, as they will do decently. Not great, but decent. And finally, we come to our last unit, the Soul Grinders of Tzeentch. Other Chaos factions have access to Soul Grinders, but what makes Tzeentch special is the ability to hurl long-range, anti-large, magical spears at enemies. This means they become long-range, large target assassins, as well as devastating front lines monsters. Finally, they also deal magical damage, as well as armor piercing, so there is very little that can stop them. And that just about wraps up everything that there is to say about the Tzeentch roster. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and let me know what your favourite unit in the roster is. If you ask me, it has to be the Screamers. Those little rascals look like they'd make adorable pets, once they stop trying to take you to shreds, of course. If you want to see more content like this and stay up to date on any and all Warhammer 3 news, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a thing. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to check out COLONELDAMNEDERS.store for all kinds of sweet merch items. We've got some very big plans as we build up to the holiday season. I'd like to thank all supporters of the channel, in particular It's Your Boy LC, for their wonderful support at the Unclean Ones tier. One more thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.